vault didn't just turn cold, it shattered. For the two men overseeing the transfer, the last thing they would ever see was the splintered glass of two ancient containers, bleeding a nightmare straight into reality. A high-pitched, childlike giggle echoed from one corner of the room, and a low, guttural growl answered it from the other. For a frozen moment, Senior Containment Specialist David Miller and his junior partner, Agent Thorne, just stood there in the silence between two impossible things. They thought they were moving a couple of haunted objects. They were wrong. They were unleashing hell. But to understand the vortex that would swallow the building and the thing it would create, we have to go back 2 hours, to a time when the rules of reality were still holding together. There are places in this world that aren't on any map. Their funding is buried in secret government projects, and their only purpose is to lock away things that have no explanation. St. Jude's Secure Archive was one of these places. Buried 300 feet beneath the Utah desert, it was a state-of-the-art prison built for objects, not people. Think of it as a Pandora's box managed by a secret group of government spooks and shadowy billionaires, all dedicated to one terrifying job: find, study, and contain artifacts so dangerous that if the public knew they existed, it would break our collective minds. The collection at the archive was pure nightmare fuel. They had paintings that drove people mad, a mirror that showed a world where humanity lost a war we don't even remember fighting, and a music box that could supposedly stop your heart with its melody. Each one sat in a custom cell, shielded by lead, iron, and electromagnetic fields. But on the lowest level, in a wing the staff called the Abyss, were the two crown jewels, the alpha-level threats. One was a simple Raggedy Ann doll with button eyes and a friendly painted smile. The other was a toddler-sized doll in a sailor suit, stuffed with straw. Separately, they were two of the most infamous haunted objects on Earth. Their names were Annabelle and Robert. The stories you've probably heard are just the beginning. Annabelle, the Raggedy Ann doll, was a gift to a nursing student named Donna in 1970. What started with the doll moving on its own and leaving little notes quickly turned sinister. Visitors found claw marks on their chests. Invisible hands tried to choke Donna's friend Lou in his sleep, and a feeling of pure evil started clinging to the doll. Paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren were called in, and they came to a chilling conclusion. The doll wasn't haunted by a little girl's ghost. It was a disguise, an anchor for a demonic entity that wanted to possess a human soul. The Warrens took the doll, and after it was blamed for a near-fatal car accident involving a priest who mocked it, they locked it in a specially built glass case in their occult museum, a case that had a prayer of binding inscribed on it, and a constant warning, never ever open. Then there was Robert, given to a boy named Robert Eugene Gene Otto in Key West, Florida, back in 1904. The doll's creation is tied to whispers of voodoo and revenge. From the very beginning, the doll was trouble. Gene's parents would hear him talking to the doll, and then hear a second, deeper voice answer back. Toys in the room would be found torn to pieces, furniture flipped over, and a terrified Gene would always say the same thing: Robert did it. As Gene got older, Robert's influence never faded. People said he moved on his own, that he would giggle, his button eyes following you around the room. Anyone who disrespected him or took his picture without asking was hit with bad luck. Car accidents, broken bones, lost jobs, sudden sickness, even death. He eventually ended up at the East Martello Museum in Key West, where he sits behind glass, surrounded by letters from people begging for his forgiveness after they made the mistake of mocking him. These were the public stories. The truth, according to the classified files at St. Jude's, was far worse. The consortium had acquired the dolls using methods that weren't exactly legal. Annabelle was taken from the Warrens Museum after a containment failure that was covered up as a small fire. Robert was snatched from the East Martello Museum after a senator's daughter was left in a coma after taking a selfie with the doll. The official story was that perfect replicas were put in their place, but the real dolls were brought here to the abyss because their power was growing. They weren't just causing bad luck anymore. They were starting to bend the world around. Then they didn't just haunt a room. They infected it. The men in charge of these paranormal titans were not guards. They were a mix of soldier, scientist, and exorcist. Senior Specialist David Miller was the best. He'd been at the archive for 20 years and had seen it all. He was calm, careful, and treated the objects with a kind of tired respect. He didn't believe in demons, but he believed in the data. And the data told him these things were killers. His partner for the transfer was Agent Benjamin Thorne. Thorne was young, smart, and a little too sure of himself. He didn't see evil forces. He saw quantum problems to be solved. He respected their power, but he wasn't afraid of it, a dangerous way to think in a place like St. Jude's. The order came from the top, asset consolidation. Annabelle and Robert were to be moved from their cells into a new, experimental vault in a deeper part of the ABs. The official reason was efficiency. The rumor whispered among the staff was that someone with more money than sense wanted to see what would happen. They wanted to know what happens when you put two apex predators in the same cage. Miller had argued against it, warning that their energies could feed off each other in ways no one could predict. His concerns were noted, and then they were ignored. The transfer was set for 3 a.m. The hallway to the new vault was sterile and cold. Miller and Thorne walked on either side of a hovering grav lift that carried the two cases. Annabelle's was thick, blessed glass etched with Latin prayers. Robert's was a hermetically sealed box. They were passing the final security checkpoint, a massive 20-foot thick titanium door. Pressure equalization complete, a robotic voice announced.
Final vault door opening.
All right, Ben, Miller said, his voice low. Let's do this by the book, no shortcuts. We get them in, run the diagnostic, and we're out. Easy, Dave, Thorne replied with a half-smirk. We're just moving a couple of dolls. Miller stopped the grav lift. He turned to Thorne, his face grim. They're not dolls, Ben. Don't you ever forget that. The moment you lose respect for what they are is the moment they get you. Thorne's smirk vanished. He nodded. Right. Bye. The book. They moved into the vault, a large circular chamber. In the center were two new containment pedestals. As the grav lift settled, the massive door began to slide shut behind them. Standard protocol. You never handle an asset this dangerous with an open door. Once it locked, they could start. That's when it happened. A low hum filled the air, so low you could feel it in your teeth. The lights flickered. A power fluctuation warning flashed red on a nearby monitor. What was that? Thorne asked, his eyes wide. Power surge, Miller said, but he knew it was more than that. He felt a static charge build in the room, a feeling he'd only had once before with the D-book box. Control, this is Miller. We have a power fluctuation in Vault 9. Report. The speakers crackled. Control here. We're not reading any surges. Everything is green on our end. Before Miller could reply, the hum grew louder, and then a new sound. It was faint but unmistakable. A little girl giggling. Thorne whipped his head around. Did you hear that? Miller didn't answer. He was staring at Robert's case. He could have sworn the doll's head was tilted at a different angle. Then, from the other side of the lift, a new sound. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around Annabelle's case. It was a sound of pure, ancient hatred, the giggle and the growl. A call and a response. The floor beneath them gave a single violent jolt. The grav lift tilted. Hard and both cases slid. Miller and Thorne lunged, but they were too slow. The two cases slammed into each other with a sickening crunch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a tiny crack spider-webbed across Annabelle's blessed glass. At the exact same instant, a fissure erupted on Robert's case. The humming stopped. The world held its breath. Then came a sound like reality itself, tearing open. A wave of force threw both men off their feet. The lights didn't just flicker. They exploded, plunging the vault into total darkness. The emergency lights kicked in a second later, bathing the room in blood red. Miller pushed himself up, ears ringing. The cases were in pieces. The dolls were lying on the cold steel floor. Robert was slumped against a wall. Annabelle lay face down, her red yarn hair spread out like a pool of blood. Vault door, which had been seconds from sealing, was frozen halfway open, and the temperature was dropping. Fast, frost was creeping across the walls. "Thorne," Miller yelled, his breath fogging. "You okay?" Thorne was on his hands and knees, staring. "They're out," he whispered, his voice shaking with a terror he'd never known. "Oh God, Dave, they're out." The air didn't just feel cold now. It felt heavy, charged. The two curses locked away for so long were free. And for the first time ever they were in the same room. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. It was the silence of two predators seeing each other before deciding what to hunt first. The symphony of chaos in the control room. 2 levels up, lead researcher Dr. Aris Thorne Ben Thorne's estranged father stared at a bank of dead monitors. What in God's name was that? Security Chief Maria Hendricks stood beside him. Localized tremor, epicenter right inside Vault 9. Energy readings are off the charts. It's like a small sun just went off down there. "Get me visuals," Aris commanded. "Cameras are out. All I have is the emergency backup, and it's corrupted." Hendricks pointed. The image from Vault 9 was mostly static, but every few seconds a single clear frame would flash through. Miller on the floor, the shattered cases, then back to snow. Audio is live, but it's a mess. She patched the audio to the main speakers. The control room filled with a low drone and the sound of chattering teeth. It was Agent Thorne. He was muttering something over and over. "Sorry, didn't mean to. I'm sorry." What is he saying? Aris leaned closer. It sounds like he's apologizing. Hendricks said, a knot of dread in her stomach. She knew the stories. She knew what you were supposed to do when you angered Robert the doll. Inside the vault, the cold was brutal. Miller had pulled Thorne to his feet. They were backing toward the half-open vault door. "Come on, Ben, snap out of it," Miller hissed. "We have to go." But as they reached the door, it shuddered and slammed shut with a groan of protesting metal. A series of heavy clicks echoed as the locks engaged. They were sealed in. "No, no, no," Thorne stammered, pounding on the cold steel. "Control, this is Thorne. Override the lockdown." The speaker next to the door crackled, but it wasn't Hendricks's voice. It was a child's giggle, seeming to come from every direction. At once, then, near where Annabelle lay, a shadow pulled itself away from the wall. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs bent at angles that were just wrong. It had no face, but Miller felt its gaze on him, a crushing, hungry pressure. "What is happening?" Thorne whimpered. "Feedback loop," Miller breathed, his worst fears coming true. "They're feeding each other, making each other stronger." Then all hell broke loose. The emergency lights began to strobe, creating a terrifying stop-motion movie. Flash. Robert's head was tilted left. Flash. Now it was tilted right, his painted smile wider. Flash. Another Raggedy Ann doll, identical to Annabelle, appeared in a corner. Flash. Now there were three. Flash. Gone. A scraping. Sound echoed across the floor. Miller and Thorne looked down. A message was being carved into the frost on the steel plates by an invisible finger. "Ask permission." Before they could react, a hurricane of force ripped through the room. Metal shelves tore from the walls. Tools flew through the air like bullets. Miller and Thorne dove for cover as a wrench whizzed past Thorne's head and embedded itself in the vault door with a deafening clang from inside the storm. They heard the two sounds again, but this time they were woven together. The high-pitched giggle of a cruel child, the deep, demonic growl of a predator. They weren't just coexisting now. They were harmonizing. The events unfolding in St. Jude's are a stark reminder that some doors should never, ever be opened. The stories we tell about objects like Annabelle and Robert are often passed off as just scary stories, but maybe they're really warnings. If you find these dives into the unknown compelling and believe that some legends are rooted in terrifying truths, consider subscribing to the channel. There are countless other files just like this one, other stories that defy all explanation, and we're going to bring them into the light. Now, let's get back to the nightmare unfolding hundreds of feet below the desert as the laws of physics began to completely fall apart. The storm of flying metal stopped as suddenly as it began. The vault fell silent. "We need to recontain them," Miller said, his mind racing. "The emergency ritual kit. We have to try and force them back." But as he looked around, a deeper horror set in. The room was wrong. The wall to their left rippled like a reflection in water. The corner where Annabelle lay seemed to stretch and shrink with every strobe of the red lights. "Dave," Thorne whispered, his voice cracking. "Look, the clock." A large digital timer on the wall was spinning wildly, a blur of numbers. It flickered between dates 100 years in the future and back to the early 1900s. "They're not just haunting the room," Miller realized with pure terror. "They're rewriting it. The vortex, it's tearing the building apart." This was it, his greatest fear. The combined energies weren't just making a powerful ghost. They were creating a bubble of space-time where the rules no longer applied. They weren't trapped in a vault anymore. They were trapped inside the curse itself. Thorne started screaming, pointing at the wall behind Miller. Miller turned. A door had appeared where no door should be. A simple wooden door with peeling white paint. Through its small window they could see a sunny child's bedroom. It was Jean Otto's room from 1904, and sitting in a small chair was Robert the doll, not the one on the floor, but the original, his head tilted, watching them dot as they stared. A dark, clawed hand reached into the vision and placed a Raggedy Ann doll right next to Robert. The two dolls sat side by side, staring out at them. Then the door dissolved back into the steel wall. "This isn't real. This isn't real," Thorne chanted. "It's real enough for us," Miller shot back, fighting his own panic. "They're showing us. They're merging. Their histories, their curses, it's all becoming one." The psychological attack grew worse. Whispers filled the air. Miller heard his dead wife, her loving words now twisted into accusations. Thorne heard his father, Dr. Aries Thorne, his voice echoing from the speakers, berating him for his arrogance. In the control room, Aries watched, horrified, insisting he hadn't said a thing. The entities were digging into their deepest fears, turning their own minds against them. Then came the scratches. Thorne cried out, ripping at his shirt. 3 deep, bloody claw marks were carved into his chest, just like in the Annabelle case. File. At the same time, he started coughing violently, a sickly, wheezing sound, the kind of sudden illness people blamed on Robert's curse. The two curses were attacking him at once. The vault itself became a weapon. The floor tilted like the deck of a sinking ship. A hallway to a storage closet stretched into an impossible, endless corridor. The ceiling dropped, crushing them with claustrophobia, then soared into a cavernous space with shadows dancing in the rafters. In the control room, the audio feed was just a symphony of terror. They could hear Miller yelling coordinates that didn't exist, and Thorne screaming apologies to a doll. Through it all was the sound of a little girl's mocking laughter, woven together with a demon's growl. Dr. Aries Thorne listened to his son's mind breaking apart. "You're creating a pocket dimension," he whispered. "A nightmare dimension, built from the psychic energy of both curses. We can't reach them. We can't help them." He was right. Miller and Thorne weren't in Utah anymore. They were somewhere else, entirely, a place made of fear, history, and the unholy power of 2 of hell's most famous ambassadors. And the nightmare was about to hit its peak. The chaos in the vault began to focus. The strobing lights, the shifting walls, it all pulled toward the center of the room. The air crackled, and a vortex of swirling red and black energy formed between where the 2 dolls lay. In the eye of this supernatural hurricane, 2 figures began to rise from the floor. Annabelle and Robert were floating, suspended in the storm. They weren't just dolls anymore. Their heads turned. Their limbs moved with a horrifying, jerky motion, like puppets on a string. Miller knew this was the end game. The vortex was a gateway, a bridge between their world and this one. If that entity succeeded, the horror wouldn't stop in Vault 9. It would swallow the whole archive, and then the world. He looked at Thorne. The younger agent was huddled in a corner, his eyes empty, his hair now streaked with white. He was whispering a single phrase. 2 smiles in one face. 2 smiles in one face. Miller understood. The innocent smile of the Raggedy Ann doll, and the creepy smirk of Robert. The entity wasn't one or the other. It was both. A hybrid horror. He remembered a last-ditch protocol, something so dangerous it was only ever whispered about, the sympathetic anchor. The theory was that you could destabilize an entity like this by forcing it to focus on a single overwhelming desire. And what did these things want most? Annabelle's demon wanted a soul to possess. Robert's curse was triggered by disrespect. To stop the vortex, one of them had to become the ultimate target. It was a suicide mission. "Ben," Miller yelled, crawling over to him. "Ben, listen to me. I have a plan." Thorne looked up, his eyes unfocused. Too late, it wants a host. He stood up, his movements stiff, unnatural, and started walking toward the vortex. "It's my fault. I have to pay. Let it take me." "No." Miller shouted, tackling him. "It's not about paying. It's about winning." He shoved Thorne behind him and stood, facing the chaos. He took a deep breath and made eye contact with the floating sailor doll. "Hey, you!" He screamed, his voice raw. "You're nothing. A cheap toy. In a stupid little suit. You think you're scary? You're a puppet." He threw every insult he could think of, breaking the #1 rule of dealing with Robert the doll. The vortex seemed to shudder, and the child's giggle turned into a shriek of rage. The pressure in the room doubled, but Miller wasn't done. He turned his gaze to the floating Raggedy Ann doll. He ripped the crucifix from his own neck and held it out. "And you, demon, you want a soul, a vessel? I'm right here. Come on. An old, tired soul, full of regret. Take IT, possess me." He'd done it. He had offered himself up to one entity while committing the ultimate act of disrespect to the other. He made himself the single most desirable and most hated thing in their new reality. The effect was instant and catastrophic. The vortex, which had been growing, collapsed in on itself, with Miller at the center. The two entities, their new mind torn by two opposite, overwhelming commands, turned all of their power inward on the one man who dared to challenge them both. The last thing the control room heard was David Miller's voice. He wasn't screaming. He was laughing, a final human laugh of defiance. Then that laugh was swallowed by a sound that was not of this world, a shriek that was both a child's giggle and a demon's roar, blended into one soul-tearing scream. A flash of pure white light blew out the camera feed, and then for the first time in hours there was silence. The silence is what finally broke the spell in the control room. The energy readings flatlined. The seismic activity stopped. The temperature in the vault was returning to normal. "It's over," Hendricks whispered. "Get a breach team down there. Now. Full hazmat, full ritual kits. I want every countermeasure we have." It took them 20 minutes to cut through the door. Dr. Eris Thorne insisted on going in with them. When they finally got inside, the scene was one of total ruin. The vault was scorched black, the walls warped and twisted. The shattered glass from the cases had been turned into a fine, black sand that coated the floor dot, and on the floor sat the dolls, lifeless and inert. Robert was propped against the far wall, his head bowed. Annabelle was lying face up near the door, her painted smile, looking empty. The power was gone. They were just dolls again. The team swept the room. Of senior specialist David Miller, there was nothing. Not a body, not a piece of his suit, not a single drop of blood. It was like he'd been erased from reality. They found Ben Thorne in the corner where Miller had left him. He was alive, but his mind was shattered. His hair was completely white, and he was rocking back and forth. When his father, Aris, knelt beside him, Ben looked up with old, terrified eyes and whispered the only testimony to what had happened. 2 smiles, he muttered, his voice a dry rasp. They made a new one. 2 smiles in one face. The official report on what was called St. Jude's Incident, 734, is sealed away. The public story was a gas leak and an explosion, a tragic accident that killed one agent and left another with severe PTSD. Ben Thorne was quietly moved to a private medical facility where he remains today, haunted by the 2 smiles he saw merge into one. The consortium learned its lesson. Some forces should never meet. They decided to separate Annabelle and Robert by the widest margin possible. They couldn't risk destroying them. Who knows what that would unleash, so they chose total isolation. According to the files, Annabelle was moved to a new vault, buried a mile beneath a desolate salt flat. Robert was taken to a tiny, windswept island in the North Sea to be guarded by a silent order of monks who would never speak his name or look at him. They were separated by oceans and continents, their curses contained once more, but a terrifying question remains. For 2 hours in that vault, 2 of the most powerful dark entities we know of didn't just meet. They merged. They created something new. And when that vortex collapsed, where did that new entity go? Was it destroyed? Or did it, as the sympathetic anchor protocol guessed, anchor itself to the soul of David Miller? The official file is closed. But in the terrifying world of the paranormal, nothing ever truly ends. It just waits. And the thing they created that day, the Gestalt horror with 2 smiles in one face, tied to the soul of a very brave man, it's still out there somewhere, and it's just waiting for another door to open.